The Crystal Bay Hotel ballroom sparkled like a treasure chest filled with diamonds. Hundreds of tiny lights hung from the ceiling, making everything glow with a warm golden color. The marble floor was so clean and shiny that it looked like a mirror reflecting all the beautiful people walking on it. Rich ladies in fancy dresses that cost more than a car moved around with glasses of expensive wine. Men in black suits with bow ties talked about their businesses and vacation homes. The air smelled like fresh flowers and expensive perfume. In one corner of the huge room sat an old black piano that looked tired and forgotten. Its wood was a little scratched, and some of the keys were worn down from years of being played. It seemed out of place among all the fancy decorations and wealthy people. Like an old dog sitting in a room full of show cats, Sabrina Lockridge stood in the middle of the room like a queen holding court. She was 41 years old and owned several big companies that made her millions of dollars every year. Her emerald green dress fit her perfectly and probably cost more than most people make in 3 months. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, and her makeup looked like it was done by a professional artist. Everyone knew her name because she was always in the news talking about her money and giving her opinions about everything. She loved being the center of attention more than anything else in the world. Tonight was her charity event, which meant she was the most important person in the room, and she made sure everyone knew it. As she talked and laughed with a group of wealthy donors and newspaper reporters, her eyes kept drifting to the lonely piano in the corner. She had an idea that would make everyone laugh and remember her party forever. "You know what?" Sabrina said in a loud voice that carried across the room like she was making an important announcement. "If anyone here can play this old piano perfectly, I'll marry them tomorrow morning." She tapped her long fingernails on the piano lid and smiled like she had just told the funniest joke in the world. The rich people around her burst into laughter like it was the most hilarious thing they had ever heard. They thought it was impossible that anyone at the party could really play piano well enough to take her seriously. Some of the guests whispered to each other and shook their heads with amused smiles. A few reporters wrote down what she said, thinking it might make a funny story for their newspapers. Everyone treated it like a silly game that would never actually happen. On the other side of the big room, Damon Mitchell was quietly cleaning tables and refilling water glasses. He was 26 years old and had been working as a janitor at the hotel for almost a year. His dark blue uniform had the hotel's name stitched on the chest, and he carried a small cart with cleaning supplies wherever he went. Most of the rich guests never even looked at him when he cleaned around their tables. To them, he was invisible, just part of the background like the furniture or the wallpaper. But Damon heard every word that Sabrina said, and his heart started beating faster like a drum in his chest. He had been playing piano since he was 8 years old, learning on an old keyboard his aunt bought from a garage sale for $20. It was missing some keys and made strange buzzing sounds, but it was enough for him to teach himself how to play. He practiced every single day for hours, sometimes until his fingers hurt, 'cause music was the only thing that made him feel truly alive and happy. Damon set down his water pitcher and walked slowly toward the group of fancy people surrounding the piano. His hands were shaking a little, but he tried to keep his voice steady and calm. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely. "Did you really mean what you just said about the piano?" The laughter stopped immediately, like someone had pressed a pause button on a movie. All the wealthy people turned to stare at him with surprised faces, like they couldn't believe a janitor was talking to them. Some of them looked annoyed that a worker had interrupted their conversation. Sabrina looked confused for a moment, like she was trying to remember who he was. She had seen his face around the hotel, but she had never really paid attention to him before. "I suppose I did mean it," she said with a smile that wasn't very kind. "Why are you thinking about trying?" The people around her started giggling again, but this time it sounded mean and nasty, like they were making fun of him. If you're serious about keeping your word, then yes, I would like to play," Damon said with quiet confidence that surprised everyone, including himself. The giggling got louder, and some people started whispering to each other about how embarrassing this was going to be. They pulled out their phones to record what they thought would be a disaster that they could share with their friends later. One man in an expensive suit said loudly, "This ought to be entertaining." A woman with big diamond earrings whispered to her friend, "How long do you think he'll last before he gives up?" Sabrina waved her hand toward the piano bench like she was giving permission to a child to play with a toy. "Please, go ahead," she said with fake politeness. "Show us what you can do." She was already thinking about how funny the story would be when she told it to her friends tomorrow. Damon walked to the piano and sat down on the small bench. His work uniform looked strange and out of place next to the beautiful black piano, but he didn't seem to care what anyone thought. He placed his hands gently on the keys and closed his eyes for a moment, like he was saying a silent prayer or remembering something important. The room got quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that happens when people are waiting for something bad to happen, so they can laugh about it. Some guests were still smiling and whispering, expecting him to play something simple like "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," and then give up when he realized he was in over his head. But when Damon's fingers touched the keys for the first time, everything changed in an instant. The first notes that came from the piano were soft and gentle, like a whisper or a lullaby that a mother might sing to her baby. But there was something special about the way his fingers moved. Something that made even the most cynical people in the room stop talking and start listening. Within just a few seconds, the simple melody began to grow and change, becoming more complex and beautiful. With each passing moment, his left hand started playing deep, rich chords that rumbled like distant thunder, while his right hand danced across the higher keys with movements so fast and precise they looked like magic. The conversations around the room stopped completely. People who had been laughing just moments before now stood with their mouths open, unable to believe what they were hearing. Even the hotel staff members who had been serving food and drinks stopped what they were doing and gathered around to listen. The music that poured from the piano was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever heard before. It wasn't just notes being played in the right order. It was a story being told without words, a painting being created with sound instead of colors. Damon's fingers moved across the keys like they had been born there, each movement flowing into the next like water running down a hillside. Sometimes the music was soft and sad, like the sound of rain falling on a window. Other times it was loud and powerful, like ocean waves crashing against rocks during a storm. He played melodies that seemed to reach into people's hearts and touch feelings they had forgotten they had. Some guests found themselves thinking about their childhoods, their first loves, their biggest dreams, and their deepest fears, all because of the magic that was flowing from the old piano. As Damon continued to play, the wealthy people in the room began to realize that they had made a terrible mistake in judging him. This wasn't some amateur trying to show off. This was a true artist, someone with a gift so rare and special that it could move people to tears just by listening. A woman in a red dress started crying quietly, wiping her eyes with a silk handkerchief. An older man, who owned several banks, stood completely still, his wineglass forgotten in his hand as he listened with wonder. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes and were just absorbing the incredible performance happening right in front of them. The music seemed to fill every corner of the massive ballroom, wrapping around everyone like a warm blanket on a cold night. Sabrina watched Damon play and felt something she had never experienced before. For the first time in her adult life, she was witnessing something that money couldn't buy, something that all her wealth and power couldn't create or control. The confidence she always carried began to crack like ice melting in the sun. She had spent her whole life believing that the most important people were the ones with the most money, the biggest houses, and the fanciest clothes. But here was a hotel janitor making music so beautiful that it made her expensive party seem small and meaningless in comparison. She found herself leaning closer to the piano, drawn in by the magic just like everyone else in the room. The piece Damon was playing seemed to tell the story of his entire life through music. There were sections that sounded like childhood innocence and joy, followed by parts that spoke of struggle and hardship. Then came triumphant passages that soared above everything else, showing hope and determination rising above any obstacle. His face was peaceful and focused, like he was somewhere far away from the ballroom, in a place where only he and the music existed. Sweat began to form on his forehead from the intense concentration and physical effort of playing such complex music, but his hands never faltered or made a single mistake. Every note was exactly where it needed to be, every chord perfectly timed and placed. When Damon reached the climax of his performance, his hands moved so fast across the keys that they looked like a blur. The music built to incredible heights, with layers of melody weaving together like golden threads in a magnificent tapestry. The sound was so powerful that people could feel it in their chest, in their bones, in their very souls. Some guests had tears streaming down their faces without even realizing they were crying. Others stood with their hands pressed to their hearts, overwhelmed by the emotion pouring from the piano. Even the tough security guards at the doors had stopped watching for trouble and were listening with amazement. The old piano, which had sat neglected in the corner for so long, was now the center of the universe, singing with a voice more beautiful than any human could ever possess as the final notes rang out across the silent ballroom. Damon's hands slowly lifted from the keys. The last chord hung in the air like a gentle sigh before fading away into perfect silence. For several long seconds, nobody moved or spoke. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, afraid that any sound might break the spell that had been cast over them. Then, like a dam bursting, the applause exploded from every corner of the ballroom. People cheered and whistled and clapped their hands until they hurt. Many were still crying, wiping their eyes with expensive handkerchiefs and napkins. The standing ovation went on for what felt like forever, with people shouting bravo, and incredible, and amazing. At the top of their lungs, Damon stood up from the piano bench and looked directly at Sabrina, who was staring at him with a face full of shock and confusion. Her perfect makeup was slightly smudged because she had been crying too, though she tried to hide it. "I played perfectly," he said simply, his voice calm and steady despite the chaos of applause around them. "Now, about that promise you made." The ballroom fell silent again as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Sabrina's face went through a dozen different emotions in just a few seconds. She looked embarrassed, amazed, confused, and maybe even a little scared. She had made her challenge as a joke, never thinking anyone would actually be able to meet it, especially not the hotel janitor she had barely noticed before tonight. I don't know what to say," Sabrina stammered, looking around at all the people watching her every move. The reporters were recording everything, and she knew that whatever happened next would be talked about for years to come. "You said if anyone could play the piano perfectly, you would marry them," Damon reminded her gently. "I held up my part of the deal." The crowd murmured and whispered, some people nodding in agreement while others looked shocked that a janitor would actually hold a billionaire to her word. Sabrina felt trapped by her own careless words, but she also felt something else. She felt respect for this young man who had just shown her that real talent and beauty existed in places she had never thought to look. "You're right," Sabrina said finally, her voice stronger now. "I made a promise, and I always keep my promises." She paused and looked around the room at all the faces watching her. "But before we talk about marriage, I think we should talk about..." getting to know each other. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? Damon smiled for the first time all evening, and it was like the sun coming out from behind dark clouds. I would like that very much, he said. The crowd erupted in cheers again, but this time it was different. It was the sound of people celebrating, something beautiful and unexpected, something that reminded them that the world was full of surprises and magic if you just knew how to look for it. Over the next few weeks, videos of Damon's performance spread across the internet like wildfire. Millions of people watched and shared the clip of the janitor, who amazed a room full of wealthy people with his incredible musical talent. The story became famous around the world, with people calling it proof that you should never judge someone by their job or their clothes. Damon and Sabrina did have that dinner, and then many more dinners after that. They discovered that despite coming from completely different worlds, they both loved music, helping others, and finding beauty in unexpected places. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony where Damon played the piano for their first dance. The old piano from the hotel was moved to their new home, where Damon played every evening for Sabrina and anyone else who wanted to listen. The story of "If you can play this piano, I'll marry you" became a legend that people told their children and grandchildren. It reminded everyone that talent and worth aren't measured by money or fancy clothes, but by the gifts that live inside a person's heart and soul. Damon started a music school for children who couldn't afford piano lessons, teaching them that with hard work and dedication, anyone can create something beautiful. Sabrina learned that the most valuable things in life can't be bought with money, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places. Their love story showed the world that when we look past appearances and prejudices, we might just find the magic that makes life truly worth living. And every time Damon sat down at that old piano to play, he remembered the night when his music changed not just his life, but the lives of everyone who heard it.